Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. Today, my guest is Alex Bean. Alex was co-founder of Divvy, a cloud-based expense management platform. Divvy sold to Bill.com in 2021 for $2.5 billion. Since the exit, Alex has written a book and started Tandem Ventures, a venture capital firm primarily investing in Utah-based technology companies. I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Alex, welcome to Authors at Drucker. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So you and I met maybe over 5 years ago. I was working at a private bank and I was speaking in Utah, and the topic was parenting amid prosperity. So I feel like we're having a full circle moment here with featuring your book.
Your content was so inspiring. I just
There we go.
stopped thinking about it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So your book is called Factory for Good: The Pitfalls of Prosperity and How to Avoid Them. As I was reading your book, it felt like you were taking us along on a very personal journey that you had. And tell us a little bit about maybe what inspired the book. Obviously, you could tell us a little bit about Divvy and what got this project started.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started a tech company with a buddy of mine in 2016. We built it for a handful of years. And in 2021, we were fortunate enough to sell. So we liquidated in 2021, and I didn't stay on for 3 months or 3 years or anything like that. Like, I was gone kind of like the next day. So for me, it was this abrupt start, stop, restart. And I started going through, obviously a big change. And I went on this little journey of like, wait a minute, what does this mean? What do I do with myself? What is my purpose now? What's my responsibility with the money that's come my way? And so I started interviewing people that had been in these shoes, were raised in these shoes, or were much older than me or at the same age. And I just was like, what are you doing? What answers do you have? And through that, as well as kind of my family history story, which I don't need to go into today, of like having seen money do great things and having seen money do really kind of negative things to families, I went on this journey of discovery. And as I started to discover what I wanted to do and the choices I wanted to make, I was hearing amazing stories from other people. So I said, all right, I think there's some cool stories from these other people. I think I have my own journey I can tell with my own family history. And it kind of fell backwards into the book after about 6 months of doing these interviews for fun. I was like, wait a minute, we should do something more formal.
So what would you say surprised you the most about your experience with the liquidity event and exiting Divvy? What surprised you? What caught you off guard, or what blindsided you?
Yeah. So I think I could say two things. So the first thing is, I'll call that first stage honeymoon. Right when it happened, I'll tell you, after like 10 plus years, not just in my company Divvy, but in the other startups I was doing, I was ready for like a lift of stress. It was really nice for the first couple months to spend time with my kids, to just kind of detox. What I wasn't prepared for is when my kids went back to school, my friends are at work, and my wife's doing her own thing during the day, that I felt this sense of loss that I just wasn't anticipating. Meaning you work so hard to like climb the mountain and reach this American dream, which I'm super grateful for. You're thinking the American dream, it's amazing. And then all of a sudden you sit there, and I started to have these feelings of like, wow, like, why do I feel less happy 5 months after this transaction than I did when I was in the middle of it? And there was all this stress and all this work, and I missed it. So that sense of loss was really, really surprising. I did not expect that. I also did not expect, my wife, it was just the change of it. And so it caused us to go through discussions and kind of re-glue ourselves together as to who we wanted to be. And that was like, our marriage was more complicated than it was before because it changed. And so those two things were things I didn't expect, didn't see coming.
There's a really great book that was written by Dennis Jaffe and Jim Grubman, and they talk about immigrants and natives to wealth. And they use this immigration concept of, look, when people come to this country, you know, maybe they don't speak the language. They're trying to figure out how to find jobs. They're trying to just live. And they use the concept immigrant, you know, an immigrant to wealth, and just how bewildering it can be. And then you have the natives, who are your kids, who end up growing up in it, growing up around it, and they're swimming in it. And they, you know, for them, it's not something that's necessarily ends up being something different. So you end up having really kind of really different experiences. I thought it was an interesting concept.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting, but it also, you know, the immigrant problem and the native problem. The natives, you know, the children in this situation have their own set of challenges that come with, you know, having it be around them, and what does that look like? And that was a big component of like the marriage thing. Is like, shoot, how do we not screw up our kids, and how do we not screw up what we have in our marriage? And because money complicates stuff, it does.
So, I mean, it seems like you have no choice but to maybe be more explicit about that. Is that how you approached it? Or like when you talked about, you know, how you want your kids to be affected or not be affected by the liquidity event and by just this newfound wealth, like how did you approach that with your wife?
Well, differently. My wife, I was like, let's do these things. And my wife was like, let's do none of them. And so we were very different. And we come from a different background. Like she was raised, you know, on the poorer side. I was raised kind of upper middle class, I guess. So like I was like, let's go buy a cabin as an example. And my wife was like, stop, like, let's just pause for a second. Let's not change. Let's just keep things as they are. I used to joke, she's, you know, we've come together in the middle, but I used to joke for that first year. One, our marriage was probably the hardest year of our marriage since maybe the first year, just because again of all this change and having to digest. And if she could have pressed a red button that first year that says go back to the way things were, she would have pressed the red button. She wouldn't have told me, but that's what she wanted. Because the thing that she cares most about in the world is her kids, is our kids. And you know, like it's one of those, you know, we talked about this before. People don't have a lot of empathy for someone with money, which I totally understand. I'm not asking for empathy, but one thing we've seen in study after study is money doesn't bring happiness, and frankly has like raises the percentage that your kids are going to end up entitled or screwed up or dependent or, you know, in a bad situation. And so like those were not lost to us because I felt that in my own family in various ways. I've seen it. And so we knew the effects of that. And so it was a lot of like discussion and trying to think through, yeah, how do we be more explicit? How do we talk about it? But also how do we not? How do we hide it? How do we try to, you know, figure out ways to raise our young kids in a way that is productive and doesn't lead to all those negative outcomes?
Yeah. So in Factory for Good, you talk about three things that you use to kind of triangulate your way to happiness and fulfillment. You talk about purpose, relationships, and legacy. Can you unpack like how you landed on that and why those are
Yeah,
important?
can I quickly give the analogy of the factory for
Yeah,
good,
please do.
why we go with it? Because it'll give context to the three pillars lead to that, right? And so the idea is, you know, we all go to our factories every day. Whatever your work is your factory. You take your time, your talent, your energies, and you're trying to produce something. And for a long time, for noble reasons, that production is actually is money. Like you're trying to produce money because that's what pays for your house or your food or your necessities and opportunity. And you know, that welcome to America. That's amazing. What I'm talking about is if if that's the only thing you're trying to produce is money, that's the wrong North Star. And if you're in a position where you have produced money, you need to take it and say, hold on, let's put money as an input. And let's change the output and the focus to not be just trying to produce money, but let's try to produce something that has impact on yourself, on your family, and on other people in the community for generations to come. And that's what we call good. So the factory for good is thinking about where are you going to spend your time, your talent, your energy, but also your money, whatever level that is, to produce something that is good. And so we use that analogy because that's the destination and that's the challenge of the book is, yeah, we all climb what we call Money Mountain to achieve some form of money. Where it gets dangerous is that we think that money is going to bring us some form of happiness, and it just doesn't. And the book and many thousands of books before have talked about that. But those three pillars, the three pillars are really important because purpose does two things. One, it's a focus on yourself. What is your purpose? Why do you wake up in the morning? And we tie that to happiness. There's a lot to be said about when someone is mission driven and purpose filled, they have a level of happiness regardless of what's going on around them. And there's a lot of stories that we talk about. As an example, myself, when I didn't have purpose and I wasn't in the business and I was just kind of hanging out, I didn't have the level of happiness that I was used to, because for the last 10 years I had been building and growing and I knew exactly what I was going to do. And so every day I kind of got that euphoria from going on the hunt. So purpose is very singular. It's by yourself. Relationships is very much, those around you. And then legacy is about the community beyond those around you. And it's kind of, we use that as the way to kind of set up the framework to get you to your factory for good.
So talk about, so you exit Divvy, you find yourself maybe a little bit lost. How did you find your purpose? I mean, you had faith and you had family before and during Divvy, and it's not like those went away, but how did you discover what was going to be your purpose?
Yeah, but ask yourself that question, right? Like even family, right? The most important thing, let's just assume that it is for both of us, that family is the most important. You don't wake up thinking like, oh, family. All right, my whole day, it's family. It's not realistic, right?
Yeah.
My 14-year-old daughter doesn't want to be with me all day. She has her friends, she has her other things. So the question is like, Dave, why do you wake up? When you wake up in the morning, what are you doing that day? What is your purpose? Do you feel like you know that?
I'm pretty clear on it. Mine is to preserve families and perpetuate businesses. And I create content. I create experiences that are to that end. So that's my purpose.
Yeah, which by the way is awesome because you have it. And now all the decisions you're making with your day and the content you write is around like that because you believe in that cause, you believe in that purpose.
Yeah.
When you say, well, faith and family, it's like, well, yeah, I still have my faith and I still have my family, but those are like the things that I do with me as I go about my day. And it's like, all right, well, what can I deliver? Right. And like, how can I do it? So I started to experiment. We have the 4 stages of an exit. The first is honeymoon. Like it feels great to be gone. It could last a day or it could last a year, but at some point you go into loss of identity, loss of structure, loss of purpose. 3 is experiment. And for me, I just started testing stuff. And I joke about this in the book, but like, I was playing piano with my daughters at their piano recital. I took like magic sleight of hand card lessons just because I was like, oh, I'm going to, I've always wanted to try that. I did a bunch of things like hobbies and stuff I've always wanted to try. The difference is those were hobbies. Those were just things to keep me busy. They didn't have this underlying output of good or a purpose to them that I believed in. And so fundamentally, I had to kind of keep going until I found something that gave me fulfillment. And that was working with the entrepreneurs in my area, which I'm from the Utah area. I feel like I was fortunate enough to have success here. And I'm like, wow, if I can pass down anything I learned to the next generation of entrepreneurs and they can have the same outcome or bigger, great. And so that kind of became my purpose from a work perspective.
Yeah.
And from that, I was like, if I can tell my story to other people, other founders like me that are going to go through these exits, I want them to learn 2 things. 1, money isn't the reason you're creating. It's not the outcome you're hoping it is. But when you get money, if you're lucky enough to get there, here's what you can do with it that makes a significant impact. That'll be for the betterment of yourself, your family, but also many other people around you. And that's why we got to the book.
I want to lean in a little bit to identity because I think it's dangerous to be a former anything. It's actually not fulfilling. Former college basketball player, former whatever. I think it's energizing to be a future something. You're chasing something down. There needs to be some sort of something that you're chasing ambitiously. I believe to find happiness. But what do you think about that and identity?
Have you ever heard? I'm into sports, so this analogy will ring true. But like the concept of, you should feel bad not for the nerd in high school, but for like the high school athlete, like the star athlete, right? Because especially in our generations, like the nerds became the most powerful people in the world. Bill Gates, to Bezos, to Musk, like they're the rich guys now, right? But the star athlete, it's in the past. It was like he can't recreate it. It was something that happened years ago. And you're right. There's something incredibly sad about that when you think about it. And, so when I left Divvy, that's what I was feeling. Like I was going to bed and I was trying to convey to my wife, which ultimately the saying that came to me, which a friend taught me was I wasn't earning my sleep because I wasn't becoming something. I wasn't on a pursuit of a path that challenged me. I wasn't climbing a mountain. And I really think that obviously men and women, but us humans are meant to build. We're meant to become. We're meant to look ahead and say, I'm going to strive for that. And if you go through these exits, or even if you're considering it, but if you go through an exit, you kind of fall into the other side and you're off the mountain, and it's like, yeah, what am I about? What am I going to do? And it's a real challenge. And again, it's not something that you're going to get a lot of empathy for when you try to go online and say, what am I going to do with my time? And I don't expect that, but it's a real feeling. In fact, like I tell people, I'm not a depressed person. It's not my personality. I'm actually quite optimistic, but I have never felt more challenged in my happiness or depression than that like 4 to 8 month range after the exit, because of that loss of identity. You lose your identity of being like the guy and the founder and all the employees looking up to you and the challenge of it. There's so much that comes with it that's gone, that it's surprisingly more difficult than you would think.
Well, you'll appreciate this story. I was working with a business owner in the Midwest, and he got an offer to sell his business. It was way more than he ever thought he would ever sell his business for.
Yeah.
And he decided to not sell it. And this isn't going to surprise you, but it might surprise the audience. But the reason he didn't sell it was because he was afraid of becoming obsolete in his community. He was afraid that his 400 employees, wouldn't need him anymore. He was afraid that the city council would no longer come and ask for his opinion. Like, that's why he didn't sell his business, Alex. Isn't that, it's wild.
Yeah, but it's super. What did he understand? He understood like what's money. Money is a currency to do something, and the currency that he wanted was he wanted to be
Needed.
He wanted to be needed. And so when he sat there and he's like, well, I don't actually want money. I want to be needed. I want to do things for people I love, or to be involved in the things I love. And he was smart. Like, and I'm not saying, oh man, he should never sell and money's the devil, because that's not it. But he was smart to understand, hey, if I just sell, no one's really going to care. My 400 employees will have a new boss and a new person that they're going to talk to, and I can't do what's best for them when I'm at my vacation home, wherever that is.
But he's one of the only people that understood that. Like, people around him that heard about this were like, you're crazy for not selling. You're an idiot. Like, why would you keep all this stress when you could just cash out? But he understood. He was pretty clear. And looking back, it's like, wow, he really did understand what he was after, what he was pursuing.
So some of the coolest people I met were basically people that found their second mountain to climb. And let me explain. Like, some people stayed in their business like that guy. Mm-hmm. And they said, you know what, I'm going to stay in this business because I want to take the profits that I have and put it towards these impact things, right? Maybe it's training for their employees, or maybe they, one guy was building rehab facilities, another guy was doing a school scholarship for people in his town. Mm-hmm. Like, him staying in his business, you can still stay in your business and do a lot of good for the people, but take that money and shed it off and do what I call a factory for good, obviously. But you could also exit. If you don't love the business and it doesn't bring you passion and energy, sell the thing, take the money, and then let's go use that money to go do some really cool things and find other ways to be needed, or find other ways to create impact and to build stuff. It doesn't, I don't want to be the guy who's like, never sell your business, because that is not my belief. But yeah, there's multiple ways to do it.
So let's talk about relationships for a second. I mean, in these kind of transition moments, it feels like, the tide goes out and you feel like you figure out more clearly who your friends are, or you have a lot of people that are starting to hang around that aren't really your friends. Tell us about the relationship piece with regards to the transition.
So we use a framework. My mom taught me this framework as a kid, and it's just I think it's a good way of thinking about it. It's the ABCs of relationships. So your A's is your circle A, and it's, for me, it's my wife, it's my kids, and there's like some friends and siblings on it that are just, they mean the world to me, right? Like, the question I ask people is, who would you take a bullet for? That's your circle A. And I call it your A's, your always. These are the people you always want to be surrounded by. You want to make sure that you're connected with them. You got the B's, which is, the people that make you feel good and they make your life better. The C's is what's super unique. The C's are the people you need to be conscious about how much time you spend with them. There's a lot of distraction when it comes to money in terms of the people that want your time and attention, and the people that heap praise on you and make you think you're great. They might not be the closest people to you, and so it's really easy to stop talking or minimize the time you with your A's and the people closest to you, and you spend too much time with the C's. And I tell a story about Shaq in the book, where Shaq basically admits that this happened to him, where he got so obsessed with the praise of all the C people in his life that he made choices that got rid of the A people in his life, and he was alone in his 100,000 square foot home. And he's like, yeah, it was bad. Like, he was really unhappy. And the biggest takeaway is just how important, like, the wealthiest person in the world is the person who has a ton of great close relationships that, he can build on and work with and go through. And the saddest person in the world is someone who has all the money in the planet, but no real relationships. Right. So to me, it's a big component, right? Like how you make sure that you're in a good spot with your kids and your wife. And people think, well, how does money change anything with my wife? And it's like, more than you would know. Do you want me to try to give an example?
Yeah. Let us in on that, if you would.
Okay, let me see if I can convey something here. We're going to give it a run. So money just fundamentally, like for Megan and I's marriage for 15 years, we'll call it, it's like, we're in this together. I went to work. She, did the kids, and I'd come home and we just help each other, right? We're a team. We like quite literally needed each other. There's full trust and all that stuff. But as I told her the other day, I said, what's two things. One, as I had more success, she said to me, she's like, Alex, the only people in your world that are telling you no is me, your wife. Your employees aren't saying no. Your friends aren't saying no. Your assistant's not saying no. Like, so right there, she's right. As I got more money, everyone around me is saying yes, telling me whatever I want to hear. The one person who's not is my wife. So there's a lot of friction. There's a reason there's a lot of divorce when someone makes a lot of money and they split. That's one of the reasons. The other element of this is we were a team for so long where she needed me and I needed her. But what happened that was unique is once the money checkbox is taken care of, she doesn't need me. Half of it's hers. So, like my worth to her is different. Now we're like, okay, well, now she has to like really want to be with me. Like not just like, oh, she needs me for me to go to work and to provide food as she's taking care of the kids. It changes the dynamic. And again, it's, we've worked through it. We're happily married and obviously it's great, but there's a lot of little nuance that comes into, the distraction of money as it comes in.
Well, and I think maybe we're all guilty of this, but when you're really chasing something, and whether it's in a startup or whatever it is, when you're really chasing something, it seems like we default to give maybe the leftovers to the people that we love the most. I hate that coming out of my mouth, but it's happened, where it's like I wake up in the morning and I'm just run out of bed and I'm off and I'm charging. And I get home and I'm tired, and the kids get the leftovers, and my wife gets the leftovers from that. And any insights on that, and in how maybe this is for entrepreneurs that are listening, but how do you regularly invest so that those relationships are solid and you don't get too distracted by something that you're excited about?
Yeah. So I go into it in the book a little, but that's some of what I saw in my own person, not my family, but, in kind of my prior generations, is the pursuit of something great, although they achieved something great, did detract from the things that mattered most. And that paid negative dividends at the end of their life, when there's a lot of, like strained relationships and, lack of connection. And there's a lot of loneliness, frankly, when that happens. So, for me, I can't say I did it perfectly, but I'll tell you what I did. my me time was before work. So if I wanted to mountain bike or golf or work out, that was before work. I would get to work by 8 to 5:30. I was home by 6. So for me, my schedule for home was typically 6 to 9. And it's like, all right, from 6 to 9, I'm home for dinner. I'm going to be with my kids. I'm going to put the kids down. And then I can go back to work, on my computer from 9 to midnight, 9 to whenever, right? So that was my schedule during the height of Divvy and before, of just kind of like, hey, that wasn't all the time in the world, but I wanted to make sure that, like, no, I was home between these hours. My wife could count on me, my kids could count on me, and I was going to be available. And obviously I would try to weekends and things like that. But during the weekdays, that was what I tried to do to stay sane. There's no one way to do it, but I would definitely make sure, that you are spending the time. Because again, if you ruin those relationships, I've just had way too many conversations with people where they look at it and they say, yeah, I made some mistakes.
Well, and I'm excited about what you're doing with Tandem Ventures, because I feel like you can come alongside these entrepreneurs and share with them a lot of empathy on what they're probably experiencing, not just with their businesses, but with their own lives. So can you tell us a little bit about Tandem Ventures?
Yeah. Tandem is a venture firm. We're out of Utah. It's those who have done it, like myself, but a bunch of other founders. We try to collect other unicorn founders and what we call Centaur, $100 million plus founders, other founders that have done it. And we come together and we're investing in the up and coming. So these are people that are leaving our old businesses to start new ones, and so we know them, we've worked with them. And we're not the world's biggest venture fund, but yeah, we love to invest in the up and coming founders. We raised a fund of about 40 million, and we've deployed some other SPVs, and it's awesome. We really love it. But we are 70% here in Utah, 30% outside of Utah.
Got it. Cool. Let's go back to the book for a second. I wanted to lean in on the bank of mom and dad. You talk about the bank of mom and dad.
Yeah.
Love to talk more about that.
So, okay, this is for anyone, like anyone who's got kids. It doesn't have to be just young kids, but kids in that, like, especially 12 to 18 or 18 to 24 range. And the concept came from, my wife grew up in a world where, she had everything she needed, but she didn't have a lot. So, when my wife wanted shoes or whatever as a kid, she'd have to, at 14 or 15, she got a job. She had to go start paying for her cell phone and all that stuff. So if you don't have money, life has a way of telling you no. And we live in a pretty prosperous part of the world here in America, obviously, where a lot of us can afford to give our kids, to go to the movies, to buy some clothes, to do those fun things. And so it gets really easy for the kids to basically just come to you, the bank of mom and dad, and ask for money. And if the ATM magically gives them money, it's like, great. And sometimes dad gives money and sometimes mom gives money, or whatever the relationship is. So what we've done is we said, mom and dad, we kind of do the newlywed spending game. We said, all right, here's 10 scenarios. And when your toddler's 12 and she wants dancing lessons, are you going to pay for them? I think most people would say, like, yeah, 100%. But as that gets up to 16 and 18 and 22, they get more nuanced, more gray. So when we say, hey, you're going to pay for XYZ when they're out of the house, 0, 50, or 100, you have to write it down, and you have to write it down. Your spouse has to write it down, and the kid has to write it down. And then everyone kind of shows.
That's
and you realize,
that's
like,
a fun exercise.
Oh, shoot. Like, we're not as aligned as we think. And the big thing is, like, we all want our kids to be dependent, right? We don't want our kids, independent. Yeah. We don't want them to be dependent. And that's happening a lot. And it's happening because we're kind of giving our kids, access to money, and we're not teaching them what it takes for them to be responsible. And so we've just drawn up what it takes to be independent. We've created these basically mission statements, or, I'm missing the word now, but for my 16-year-old, my 14-year-old daughter, we say, here's what we'll pay for. Here's what you'll pay for. We'll sign on the bottom line. You sign on the bottom line. And so she knows from 16 to 18, this is what she's going to have to pay for, so she can prep for it. And it's just awesome. It's really fun conversations. Kids need to know what they're expected to do or not do. Otherwise, they're just going to keep coming to the bank of mom and dad and asking for money and hoping that they get it.
Yeah, I always like to say, how do you say no when yes is always an option? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And there's got to be a better reason to say no than we can't afford it, because that's no longer there anymore.
Yeah, and it is like that is true for me, but it's not it's true for a lot of people when like your
Sure.
kid's asking for simple things
Yeah.
and like you can say yes. Like, but how do you learn to teach them no, or learn to teach them what their responsibility is? So one of the coolest things we did was just I'd ask these in these interviews, I'd say at 16, what do you do? What's your situation with your kid in the car? Do they know what it is? Do they know what their responsibility is? And we had all sorts of answers and responses. And it was like really fun to see how people try to teach their kids about investing during that time, or about budgeting or ownership. Hey, like you give me this and you get this in exchange. And I think the biggest thing I learned in that is it's actually not one way to do it in terms of how much you quote give your kid, but there is one way to do it, which means they have to have responsibility.
Yeah.
I'll pay for the car, but if you crash it, you pay for it. You pay for gas, you pay for insurance, and it's in my name. So when you leave the house, it's my car. Okay. They know the rules. They know they're going to have to pay for this. They know that mom and dad are going to help them out for this. Great. Let's go from there. Whatever your situation is, they have to have responsibility, and it has to be written down, because then it's like funny now when my 14-year-old asks for something. It's like she kind of knows the rules. She's like, yeah, it's 50%. I'm like, great. You don't need to ask. If you buy it, I'll pay for 50. Let's go.
Yeah. I like that concept of kind of co-investing in things with your kids. My son wants new basketball shoes. Great. I want you to have them. Are you invested in them at all? Like, what can you do to meet me halfway on this? And some of that feels a little bit ridiculous when it's like, no, I feel entitled that I've worked hard and I can buy him shoes. So I feel entitled to do that. But I need to check myself on some of those things, because ultimately no kid ends up entitled because of them. They end up entitled because of me and because of you.
Well, because you are a horrible bank. You and your spouse are horrible teachers of finances. Like if you went to your bank and they gave you free money, yeah, you would be horrible at budgeting, because you're like, look, occasionally it gives me free money. It's complicated. It's not a black or white. It's very gray. But what we found is that like having it written down, and that's the point of like the website and the book conversation, is to say, print this off, let your kids see it, have this conversation, let them know when they're 14 what happens at 16. Otherwise at 16, when you say, guess what, they're going to be like, they won't be prepared. And the thing that happens more often than we care, and especially in today's society, is at 18 or at the end of 22, we're thinking, oh, the kid knows they're going to be on their own. But the kid's thinking like, no, I'm staying home, or I'm living in the basement, or mom and dad are paying for X. And if you're not aligned and it's not like directly discussed ahead of time, yeah, it's going to be jarring. And jarring, unfortunately, ruins a lot of relationships. And that's where it gets pretty tricky.
Well, and I think what one of the things that worries me the most is that we create lifestyle expectations for our children that someone else is going to have to answer to.
Yep.
Whoever they marry is going to inherit the expectations that we gave to our children. So, in taking a more formal approach to the bank of mom and dad and laying some of these things out, maybe the person that we're helping most is the future spouse of our children, by creating some sort of boundaries and some expectations. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, totally. I actually had this conversation with a group in Arizona yesterday. If you're in the fortunate position where you can provide means to your kids, whatever level that is, like, okay, cool, let's talk about it. If it means for the rest of your life that if you want to do fun trips with your kids, you're choosing to pay for them to kind of incentivize them to come, like that's your prerogative. I've seen it work a lot, and that's great. But I'm telling you, one guy said it best. He said, don't rob your kids the pride of doing it themselves. And whether they say that or not, everyone wants to build, as you said, something themselves that they can say, I built. And that includes their lifestyle. I've met a lot of people that are trust fund kids or given a lot of money by their parents in whatever capacity, that although they might be living a high lifestyle, you can see it, you can feel it. They know they didn't earn it. They didn't take care of it. Or maybe they're living at their house when they're 26 or 30 or whatever it is. They can feel it. They know they haven't built it. You have to teach your kids to be independent and stand on their own, even if you're the richest person on the planet, if you're Warren Buffett, because your kids, everyone wants to be on their own. They want to be able to say, yeah, I bought this house. Yeah, I take care of myself. It's just a horrible feeling to have things paid for, even if you can afford it.
Well, and I feel like it wrecks their confidence. You know, if you know
100.
that you're always dependent upon someone else, like how do you really feel about yourself? So,
So,
one thing that we've tried is we do a matching for our kids, and we told them about this really early. If they work in the summer and they save for either college or a church mission, which a lot of the kids want to do in my family, we'll match them because we want to incentivize long-term savings and good choices. But I want them to own the decision to do those activities. I don't want to fund those activities fully because then they're not invested in doing
yeah,
well at school, or they're not in,
yeah.
they can blame me when there's days on the mission that are really terrible for them because
So
daddy's got me here. So
a
any
lot of,
thoughts on the matching?
I love it. Yeah. There's a lot of ways to go about it. I just think you said it. There's a confidence that comes in doing it to a degree yourself. Now, matching is like, no, it's not yourself. You're right. It's not. Mom and dad are matching 50%, but it's learning to say, yeah, but I worked, I saved, I built. So it might be easier for them to get farther ahead. And that's an incredible opportunity. But and some people are going to challenge this conversation because I've had a
Sure.
lot of these where they're like, no, I can pay for my son's school and he's going to be fine. Yeah,
Sure.
maybe. But as a general rule, if your kid doesn't know what they're doing on their own or what the outcome is when they have to do it on their own, or when that time's coming that they have to do it on their own, it's a tough situation. And you see way too many parents where it's like, my kid's 28. He hasn't really found his way. I'm kind of helping him. And it's like, yeah, because you've been helping him since he's 18 and you haven't asked them to put any responsibility or skin in the game. And don't be surprised when 10 years later, it's still the same.
Yeah, so true. I like to say that entitlement and gratitude are incompatible roommates. What role does gratitude play in keeping grounded, not only just for you personally, but in your family?
Oh, that's we have in our family, we call them the 6 B's. It's choose to be, and there's 6 of them. And I'll do it. But if my kid does something that's not, it's entitled or not grateful, I'll be like, B, and they're like, they'll usually guess one of them, but I'm like, no, think about it. And they're like, oh, grateful. To me, for me personally, like I'll give you an example of this. I was in the car with my partner. We were probably a year away from selling. Like, you don't know you're selling, but we know it's going well. And so he asked the question to me, like, what's the number I would want to make from Divvy? And I give him a number. And we had a good conversation. And then fast forward a year later, we end up selling, and it's for higher than that number by a decent amount, higher than the number I said was my number. But my partner had more than I did. He had more equity in the company, and for a lot of reasons, like, that's not the issue. But what happened, and I felt this when I left, I was like, oh man, but how come he got that much more? Like, he didn't deserve that much. Like, I did XYZ. And I had a really powerful personal experience where I sat there and I was like, wait a minute. Everything I've ever asked for has come true. Like the mountain I wanted to climb and the quote number I had in my mind and what I had been like praying to God for and say, like, can I achieve this number? It'd be amazing. It'd be everything I ever wanted. So then when I got everything I ever wanted and more, I was choosing to be jealous or mad or greedy. And I was like, gosh, dang it. I was mad at myself. It was real feelings though, right? It wasn't
Sure.
like, it's easy to say from the people that weren't there. And I had to go through a process of like, no. I have to be grateful for everything, because if not, then like, what a horrible way to live life. Like, you just would never be content. You would never actually be happy. And I think grateful is a way of saying, I have enough. Thank you. And I just think that's a powerful mentality.
Well, and there is that saying, comparison is the thief of joy. And whether
Yeah.
there's always going to be someone more athletic, someone better looking, someone that has more money. And so if we can't be content with who we are and what we're working on, then, life happiness will elude us forever.
It's actually like really sad. So when I talk to some of these interviews and have these conversations, you could tell if that was the case to this person. And like, I'll even, because it's not me, it's someone else, I'll give a number. Like, these are people who've made hundreds of millions of dollars.
Sure.
And that's more money than obviously anyone needs. And they are sad or mad or greedy or jealous that there's negativity into their life because they're like, but I should have that much more, but I could get that much more. And you're like, dude, like, how you're inviting such negativity in your life when it could be so positive. And to me, it's a mindset, and it goes into what we talked about before when we were kind of chatting here. There's the logistics of money. There's like handling your investments in your estate and your taxes and all that stuff. But the emotions of it are super, super powerful. And these are the emotions that trying to help people navigate through them and figure out, like, why do you feel loneliness after an exit? Why do you feel imposter syndrome and feel negative about, what your exit looked like? Why do you feel jealous or mad when you had such a big outcome? Like, these emotions are very real and very much come into people's lives. And so I was happy to write a book about them because I'm also I want to create a safe space to have these discussions, because I think money should be a currency to impact the world in such a positive way, but it can also very much distract and tear people apart and tear away families.
Yeah. And, I'll just add to that. I think money's just a magnifier, and it's a magnifier of who we are and what we're doing. And if we have some character flaws, money's going to magnify those. And if we have purpose and we have a direction and we have some things that we're chasing that are really great and our heart is good, then it can magnify all those things. So I agree with you. It's a magnifier. Just as we finish, I want to make sure we direct people to, I would really encourage people to just read the book. I listened to part of it, read part of it, made me think. And definitely I was kind of personalizing all along the way. There's also a website, factoryforgood.com. Can you tell us a little bit about what's found there and why you did that?
Yeah. So the book, by the way, the Audible is like 4 hours, so it's not long. You can crush it. 2x speed, it'll be nothing. So we wrote the book, and in the book, every single section kind of has like an experience. So like purpose is connected to the happiness audit. The bank of mom and dad was in relationships, and it's like tangible experiences to actually go through it, not just think about it. So we built the website to bring that there. So there's content, but there's also the experiences where you can go through and print stuff off or go through it on a digital, from a digital standpoint. It's all free. We wanted to give people ways to really interact and dig into the stuff on the website.
Alex, I appreciate you writing the book, letting us in on your journey, and also just developing some of these tools. I think, again, it's a space where, not everyone has a place to go to talk about these things. But even being able to interact with the book and have some worksheets to work through some things and get to conversations that need to be had with a spouse or with kids, I think was really helpful. So appreciate you joining us on Authors at Drucker today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
All right. Take care, man.